considered to be the earliest high culture of Central America. Everybody's heard about the Aztecs. Everybody's heard about the Maya.
In 2025, a groundbreaking wave of genomic research sent shockwaves through the study of Mesoamerican history. Ancient DNA, extracted from skeletal remains across Mexico, revealed patterns that forced scholars to rethink the rise of the Aztecs and the fate of civilizations that came before them. For decades, Graham Hancock had claimed that entire societies were violently erased from history, their fathers disappearing while maternal lines endured, leaving a genetic void that the Aztecs later filled. So, was he correct? Today, we'll uncover how new DNA analysis has revealed who the Aztecs really were. Origins and rise of the Aztecs. The story of the Aztecs begins not in the heart of the Valley of Mexico, but in the rugged deserts and river valleys of northern Mexico, where the Mexica, a Nahua-speaking people, first stirred into motion. Around the early 14th century, these groups embarked on a migration that would reshape Mesoamerica forever. Their journey was arduous, marked by decades of wandering across mountains, lakes, and plains, surviving on what the land offered and negotiating passage with the settled communities they encountered. Historical sources, including the 16th century codices and chronicles by Bernal Diaz del Castillo, suggest that for nearly 2 centuries, the Mexica were outsiders, mercenaries, laborers, and servants, often at the mercy of more powerful polities in the region. They were considered barbarians by their hosts, yet their resilience and adaptability laid the foundation for what would become one of the most astonishing empires in the Americas. In 1325, after years of searching for a prophesied sign, the Mexica established their capital on a swampy island in Lake Texcoco. They called this city Tenochtitlan. This is where the story begins. Surrounded by water, the city was naturally defensible, and the lake provided fish and reedlands for farming. Ingenious agricultural innovations followed almost immediately. The Mexica created chinampas, artificial floating gardens anchored in the lake's shallow waters, which would produce enough food to sustain tens of thousands of people. Freshwater aqueducts carried clean water across the city, and causeways connected the island to the mainland, allowing for trade, transport, and military movement. Despite their remote beginnings, the Mexica were anything but passive. Their early decades in the Valley of Mexico were marked by shrewd diplomacy and martial skill. They allied with some city-states while challenging others, gradually carving out a sphere of influence. By the mid-15th century, the Triple Alliance, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, had formed, consolidating power across the region. The Mexica contributed military strength and strategic acumen, and through this alliance, they expanded their control over dozens of city-states, from the highlands around Lake Texcoco to more distant areas in modern Puebla and Morelos. Estimates suggest that by 1500, Tenochtitlan alone may have housed between 200,000 and 300,000 people, rivaling contemporary European cities such as London or Paris. Its markets were vast, bustling with traders who came from hundreds of kilometers away, carrying cacao, cotton, obsidian, and exotic feathers. Streets were organized and navigable, lined with temples, palaces, and pyramids that dominated the skyline. The Templo Mayor, rising over 60 meters, stood at the city's center, symbolizing the Mexica's religious devotion and political power. Religious rituals, often misunderstood by Europeans as barbaric, reinforced the societal hierarchy and centralized authority, blending spirituality with governance. Every facet of the Aztec city reflected ingenuity under pressure. Engineers constructed canals and dikes to regulate the lake's fluctuating waters, and the city's layout facilitated efficient transport of people, goods, and tribute. The Mexica language, Nahuatl, spread across central Mexico, becoming a unifying tool for administration, trade, and cultural expression. But the rise of the Aztecs was not inevitable. It was a calculated gamble over centuries of survival. Pre-Aztec civilizations and collapse patterns. Long before the Mexica set foot in the Valley of Mexico, a constellation of civilizations had already transformed Mesoamerica into a world of towering pyramids, sprawling cities, and complex political hierarchies. At the heart of it all stood Teotihuacan, a city whose origins date back to around 100 BCE. By 450 AD, Teotihuacan had grown into one of the largest cities in the world. home to an estimated 125,000 to 200,000 people, rivaling the population of Rome at the time. Its Avenue of the Dead stretched over 2 kilometers, lined with massive pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, and grand residential compounds, evidence of urban planning at an almost unimaginable scale. Archaeologists have discovered murals, ceremonial objects, and obsidian workshops, revealing a society that was sophisticated, artistic, and deeply religious. Trade networks reached far beyond the city itself, connecting Teotihuacan to the Gulf Coast, Oaxaca, and even into the Maya lowlands, moving goods like cacao, jade, and fine ceramics across hundreds of kilometers. Yet the glory of Teotihuacan would not last. Around 550 AD, signs of dramatic social upheaval appear in the archaeological record. Temples were burned, stone statues defaced, and large districts abandoned. The causes remain debated. Some evidence points to internal rebellion, possibly sparked by political instability or rival factions within the elite. Other theories suggest environmental pressures, such as climate shifts, prolonged droughts, or soil degradation, undermined agriculture and destabilized urban life. Even earlier, the Olmec civilization, the so-called mother culture of Mesoamerica, had flourished along the Gulf Coast from roughly 1200 BCE to 400 BCE. The Olmecs left behind colossal stone heads, ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta, and early hieroglyphic writing that influenced later civilizations. Their political influence extended across southern Mexico, demonstrating centralized authority and long-distance exchange networks. The Olmec decline is similarly enigmatic. Shifting river courses, environmental changes, and possible internal conflict appear to have contributed, yet communities did not vanish wholesale. Genetic studies and archaeological continuity indicate that Olmec descendants likely persisted, blending into subsequent regional populations rather than being violently replaced. North of Teotihuacan, the Toltec civilization rose to prominence around 900 AD, centered at Tula in modern Hidalgo. The Toltecs, famed for their massive pyramidal structures and Atlantean warrior statues, controlled trade routes and exerted influence across central Mexico, including the Valley of Mexico. Their collapse around 1150 AD appears linked to internal unrest, possibly intensified by drought or famine. Again, the archaeological record shows evidence of destruction and abandonment. Cultural elements, such as ceramics, architectural motifs, and religious practices, were adopted by later groups, including the Mexica, illustrating continuity rather than genetic erasure. Meanwhile, the classic Maya civilization thrived from roughly 250 to 900 AD, with major city-states such as Tikal, Palenque, and Copan. These urban centers boasted monumental pyramids, ball courts, astronomical observatories, and intricate hieroglyphic inscriptions. The classic Maya collapse, often occurring in the southern lowlands around 900 AD, remains one of archaeology's most studied mysteries. Evidence points to prolonged droughts, deforestation, overpopulation, and internecine warfare as triggers. Populations fragmented, political systems disintegrated, and many cities were abandoned. Across these pre-Aztec civilizations, a pattern emerges. Urban centers rose, flourished, and fell, often violently. This continuity becomes critical when interpreting the rise of the Mexica centuries later. They entered a landscape shaped by the remnants of Teotihuacan, Toltec, and Maya civilizations, inheriting a complex web of urban ruins, trade routes, and cultural practices. While some pre-Aztec cities had been violently destroyed, the evidence shows survivors remained, communities persisted, and population lines were never completely wiped out. The Mexica were building on foundations already laid by thousands of years of Mesoamerican development, an inheritance of infrastructure, knowledge, and human continuity, rather than the blank slate of a continent erased and waiting for new rulers, as sensationalist narratives sometimes claim. Collapses were dramatic but not absolute, violent yet incomplete, and their legacies flowed into the society that the Mexica would ultimately build into the Aztec Empire. The story of pre-Aztec civilizations is thus one of astonishing achievement, environmental challenge, political intrigue, and human resilience. But wait, the story has just begun. DNA analysis and genetic insights. Long before the first Europeans set eyes on Tenochtitlan, the human story of Mesoamerica had already been quietly written in its people's DNA. Over the past 2 decades, teams led by geneticists like Dr. David Reich at Harvard and Mexican institutions, including the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, INAH, and the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, have systematically analyzed both ancient and modern genomes from across Mesoamerica. Their work has involved painstaking extraction of DNA from skeletal remains, often thousands of years old, coupled with high-throughput sequencing to map genetic continuity and variation over centuries. The goal has been to reconstruct the movements, interactions, and ancestry of populations from the Olmec and Maya through to the Aztecs and beyond. One of the clearest patterns emerging from these studies is that maternal lineages persisted almost unbroken across centuries. Even as cities rose and fell, temples burned, and empires collapsed, women's genetic signatures endured. The story of the male lineages, carried on Y chromosomes, is more complex, but no less informative. Ancient DNA studies show regional shifts, indicating mobility, elite replacement, and intermarriage over time. For instance, in sites around central Mexico, there is evidence of Y chromosome diversity increasing during periods of political transition, suggesting that conquering elites sometimes married into local populations, introducing new male lineages into pre-existing communities. Similar patterns have been observed in classic Maya sites, such as Copan and Tikal, where elite burials reveal Y chromosome variation distinct from the surrounding populace, likely reflecting strategic intermarriage or migration rather than wholesale male line disappearance. Some intriguing signals suggest small-scale migrations or gene flow from other regions. Limited markers trace connections to the Central American highlands and northern Mexico, hinting at the movement of peoples over hundreds of kilometers. Patterns observed in the genetic record also illuminate the dynamics of conquest and assimilation. When the Mexica expanded their empire in the 15th century, evidence shows that male lineages from Tenochtitlan entered local populations primarily through elite marriages, military leaders, and administrative families. Conquered regions display Y chromosome shifts consistent with the introduction of new males at the top of social hierarchies, but the indigenous population was neither erased nor entirely replaced. Maternal lineages remained steady. Across the empire, these demographic processes created a patchwork of continuity and admixture, a mosaic of inheritance rather than a clean slate. Ancient DNA also helps contextualize the collapse events of pre-Aztec civilizations. Sites like Teotihuacan, Tula, and classic Maya cities show genetic signatures indicating continuity through periods of political turmoil, famine, or rebellion. When elites were overthrown, Y chromosome markers shifted in elite burials, but local male lineages at lower societal levels often persisted. This suggests that while power and status were subject to change, the underlying population maintained its genetic heritage. So, what does Hancock say, and does the evidence support his claims? Hancock's claims versus verified evidence. For decades, Graham Hancock has claimed that societies like the Olmec, Teotihuacan, Toltec, and classic Maya were not merely conquered or declined. Instead, he says, they were violently erased, their fathers wiped from existence, leaving behind fragmented populations that the Mexica, later known as the Aztecs, inherited or rebuilt. Hancock frames this as a cyclical pattern, repeated over millennia. Yet when scholars and geneticists examine the record, the picture is far more nuanced and far less sensational. Archaeological evidence confirms that Mesoamerican civilizations did experience dramatic collapses. Teotihuacan, by around 550 AD, shows signs of widespread destruction, burned temples, defaced sculptures, and abandoned districts. The classic Maya cities in the southern lowlands collapsed in the 9th century, leaving pyramids and ball courts silent and largely uninhabited. The Toltec center at Tula declined around 1150 AD amid evidence of social unrest and environmental pressures. These collapses were violent and consequential, yet they were not wholesale genetic resets. Human populations persisted. Communities adapted, migrated, and integrated new members. Modern genomic studies reinforce this picture. Teams led by Dr. David Reich at Harvard and Mexican institutions such as INAH and UNAM have analyzed both ancient skeletal remains and modern populations across Mesoamerica. The findings are clear. Maternal lineages, tracked through mitochondrial DNA, show remarkable continuity across centuries, while Y chromosome lineages display regional shifts, evidence of elite replacement, mobility, and intermarriage, but no complete disappearance. For example, analyses of central Mexican populations from Teotihuacan, Tula, and Aztec-era sites indicate gradual introduction of new male lineages, likely reflecting political marriages or elite assimilation, rather than catastrophic, continent-wide paternal line extinction. Limited gene flow from northern Mexico and Central America does appear, consistent with trade networks, migration, and alliance building, yet this is local and incremental. It is not the kind of sweeping genetic wipeout Hancock describes. Linguistic and archaeological evidence further undermines the notion of total erasure. Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica, spread across central Mexico through trade, administration, and migration, but it coexisted with regional languages rather than replacing them entirely. Artifacts, ceramics, architectural styles, and religious iconography from pre-Aztec civilizations were adopted, adapted, and blended into Mexican culture. Hancock's interpretation of collapses as cyclical erasure is also challenged by the timing of these events. The periods of Teotihuacan decline, classic Maya fragmentation, and Toltec collapse span centuries and involve environmental stress, drought, overpopulation, and political upheaval, not sudden, continent-spanning annihilation. Archaeological surveys indicate that populations often relocated nearby or merged into surviving communities. Grave goods, continuity in urban planning, and ongoing material culture show that people endured, adapted, and maintained societal memory rather than being physically or genetically erased. It is important to note that Hancock's theories remain speculative. His work draws attention to the extraordinary complexity and achievements of ancient civilizations, and his emphasis on questioning accepted histories has inspired research and public interest in pre-Columbian societies. However, peer-reviewed studies in archaeology, genetics, and anthropology do not corroborate claims of systematic male lineage destruction or continent-wide erasure. The genomic and material record demonstrates resilience, adaptation, and partial replacement at elite levels, but not the sweeping, cyclical exterminations Hancock proposes. So, while Hancock invites the imagination to picture lost civilizations violently erased from history, genomic and archaeological evidence tells a story of resilience, adaptation, and subtle continuity. Mesoamerican history is not a series of blank slates wiped clean by conquest. It is a complex, living narrative, written in stone, clay, and DNA, where human societies endure, evolve, and leave traces that can still be read today. But wait, there's more. Spanish encounters and the Aztec legacy. When the Spanish first arrived in the Valley of Mexico in 1519, they encountered a city unlike anything they had ever imagined. Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire, sprawled across an island in Lake Texcoco, connected to the mainland by wide stone causeways and fed by aqueducts carrying fresh water for miles. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a soldier in Hernán Cortés's expedition, later chronicled the city in vivid detail. Bustling marketplaces, towering pyramids, and ceremonial precincts filled with the scent of copal and the echo of drums. The population was immense. Estimates suggest between 200,000 and 300,000 residents, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time, rivaling Paris or Constantinople. To the Spaniards, the scale and sophistication of Tenochtitlan were almost supernatural. Cortés himself referred to it as a marvel of engineering that no European city could match. Yet alongside awe came horror. Spanish observers, steeped in Christian morality, were appalled by human sacrifice, a central component of Aztec religion and statecraft. Warriors captured in battle, sometimes numbering in the thousands, were offered to the gods atop massive pyramids like the Templo Mayor, their hearts removed in public rituals. Diaz del Castillo describes the ceremonies with a mixture of fascination and repulsion. Cortés and his officers condemned these practices, but could not deny the political and economic sophistication underpinning them. Tenochtitlan was more than a religious center. It was a hub of administration, military organization, and trade, with markets that drew goods from Oaxaca, the Gulf Coast, and the highlands of Guatemala. The Spanish conquest itself was swift, brutal, and devastating. Smallpox, introduced inadvertently by European forces, ravaged the population, killing tens of thousands within months. Military campaigns dismantled the Mexican leadership, and the city fell in August 1521 after a 3-month siege. The Templo Mayor and other ceremonial structures were destroyed, and Spanish colonial authorities imposed a new political and religious order. Despite the conquest and the collapse of political dominance, the Aztec legacy endured, often in ways invisible to the Spanish. Genetic studies reveal continuity among both maternal and paternal lineages. Modern Mexicans and Central Americans carry mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome markers tracing back to pre-Hispanic populations, including the Mexica. While European colonization reshaped political structures and imposed new cultural norms, it could not erase the living descendants of the Aztecs. Families persisted, local customs survived, and communities adapted, blending old and new in complex ways that archaeology and genetics now illuminate. Archaeological evidence corroborates this continuity. Excavations in Mexico City reveal that neighborhoods, marketplaces, and even some temple foundations were reused or rebuilt rather than abandoned entirely. Artifacts, ceramics, and religious iconography reflect continuity and adaptation. The material culture of the Aztecs did not vanish with the conquest, but merged with Spanish-imposed institutions. DNA studies complement this picture, showing that while elite Y chromosome lineages may have experienced some disruption due to conquest or colonial realignment, the broader population retained its genetics. Population bottlenecks occurred, especially due to epidemics, but no evidence exists for total lineage eradication. Interestingly, the Spanish accounts themselves hint at recognition of Aztec sophistication beyond moral condemnation. Cortez's letters to Charles V emphasize the organizational capabilities of the Mexica, the discipline of their warriors, and the efficiency of Tenochtitlan's markets. Bernal Diaz del Castillo repeatedly notes the accuracy of the city's aqueducts, the grandeur of its pyramids, and the logistical feats of a city built on a swampy island. Even as they sought to justify conquest through depictions of barbarism, the Spaniards could not fully obscure the remarkable achievements they witnessed. This interplay of awe, horror, and enduring resilience makes the Aztec encounter with the Spanish both thrilling and instructive. A story not merely of conquest, but of survival, blending, and the complex legacies of one of the America's most remarkable civilizations. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.